of the recession that was happening. Funding was falling through. Our division fell from 78 faculty to 23 faculty, and so there was just kind of chaos going on in academia. And so I launched my own clinic in 2010, which is Revolution Health Center in Charlottesville, Virginia. We started actually in Scottsville, which is a tiny little town of 550 people, and that serves one of the poorest counties in Virginia, Buckingham, Virginia, and started a nutrition center there to manage chronic disease. And everything that you're going to hear today has been the journey really since that time. So 2010 to present has been a very exciting period of my career in many unexpected fashions. But for CEU purposes, my disclosures, I'm founder and CEO of Biomic Sciences, which is a biotech laboratory and research and development firm, founder and president of Revolution Health Center, my clinical practice, basic science operations, and our research groups, discoveries, experience, and products all generate all of my income. I'm not paid by any third parties. I also want to give a huge disclaimer to the genius that is behind all of the information you're going to see today. John Gilday is a PhD in molecular biology. He's sitting down in front of the microscope there with the greenish shirt. He is a brilliant guy who has done a lot of the work, both theoretically as well as really huge inroads into the genomics of everything from cancer to autism and everything else around what we're going to show you today. In addition, we have Luis Matavelli, who's our lab manager. He's on the far right, MD, PhD in nephrology and cell biology. Brilliant guy from Brazil and has worked for many years at the University of Virginia before we pulled him away from there. Gary Samuelson is in the audience today. Many of you know him. He's a PhD in atomic physics, and we've had the joy of bringing he and his wife Iris to our facility over the last year, and it's been amazing to have this cross-pollination of specialties in a single lab. Finally, we have David Roberts standing up just to the left of John there, and he is a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins and does a lot of our population statistics and has been a tour de force in a lot of our peer-reviewed journal publications. So all of these guys have worked tirelessly to get us to where we are today. In addition, at our booth, you can drop by and meet William Vitalis. We call him the unicorn, but his official title is Director of Esoteric Sciences at Biomic Sciences. So he's got the coolest title in the company and is probably the coolest dude there as well. So we love William, and if you haven't gotten to meet William, he's here in the pink shirt to the right here, which seems like an appropriate color for a unicorn to wear. And so he's one of my best friends in the world, and he and I have had the great joy of sharing in a lot of really remarkable discoveries together. So whenever life gets a little drab, we get on a plane together and travel somewhere, and he brings in the magic, and we keep moving. So acknowledgments. The additional acknowledgments is that all of you guys are here. The acknowledgement is that there are 7 billion people on the planet right now. And I wanted just to shift this conversation before we dive into science to really focus on the reality. That's not 7 billion people. These human bodies are super frail. They're super short-lived. These are 7 billion souls that I think started at the beginning of time that have entered bodies in this moment. Imagine the density of souls that 7 billion would look like. Imagine the gravity that 7 billion souls would create. Or imagine the intention that 7 billion souls would have to jump into human bodies at this moment in human history, when we're at an absolute tipping point where we either find sustainability and balance with our nature on this planet or we go extinct. That's what the next 50 years is really going to determine. And each of you sitting in the audience has joined us in body and soul to be a part of this transition of enlightenment, frankly changing consciousness, awareness, and self-empowerment ultimately, to take back what has been stolen from us on so many levels. And so I celebrate that you're one of the 7 billion souls among us on the planet. I am very humbled to be in front of so many of you. I think it's really telling that there's, among those here with us now, there's so many affected by ASD. I find it extremely humbling and pretty awe-inspiring that souls that I believe start at the beginning of time and go to the end of time have no sense of reference of time and space, saw this opportunity to jump into a body, probably full well knowing that that body would be affected by autism spectrum disorder. What kind of soul would do that? What kind of courage, what kind of intention, what kind of purpose have these children jumped into the body to achieve? And so I believe we're at a tipping point, and I believe that the ASD children among us are really a turning point. They are creating a gravity that's going to change the way we do just about everything on the planet. And it's their courage to jump into those bodies, I think full well knowing their journey, beforehand that really is awe-inspiring and humbling at the highest level. Every one of us is absolutely here for great purpose. There is absolutely no possibility that this is an accident. There is no possibility that you were not planned and designed by an intelligence much greater than any of us. There is no possibility that the complexity of the biology that supports our human life on this planet is an accident, and I think you'll see that as we move on. All right. So I guess beginning, I just say thank you. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for having the courage to do what you do every day. So many of you have explored and journeyed way past the physicians around you. We're going to focus a little bit on a topic of toxicity because it gets talked about so much in the booths and in medical clinics and everything else. There's a real focus on toxicity in these children that are affected with ASD. And there's many, many studies that we could point to that say that autistic children have much higher levels of toxin in their bloodstream or in their tissues or in their urine than non-affected individuals. This was one of those many studies. And the dark blue lines showing the autistic children compared to baseline in a normal population. And so these are different metals. You can't see the type. I apologize for the bright light on the slide. I don't know if there's a way to turn these lights off, actually. If we could turn the fluorescence off and leave those rear can lights on, that's going to work better because I have a lot of microscopy that I want to show you guys, and it's going to be better seen without that. This dark blue is elevated with lead in the red blood cell, lead in the urine. This is measurement of tin in the plasma of the blood, tungsten, and interestingly, pretty consistently in a number of studies now, we've shown that there's lower levels of cadmium in autism than other diseases. So it's not always just too much of something, perhaps. In this study, mercury didn't hit significance because I think that measuring blood and urine mercury is not a terribly sensitive method. But this was 55 children, age matched to 44 controls, and showed that data. And I think the more sensitive way to find the mercury story here is in the urine porphyrins. And so the mitochondria make these huge molecules that will be spliced down outside of the mitochondria within the cell into different porphyrins. And then they get excreted in the urine. And depending on what heavy metals, mercury, arsenic, lead, etc., depending on the presence of those at different stages of the cleaving of these molecules, you'll end up with different byproducts in the urine. So by measuring urine porphyrins, we can get a real good idea of what heavy metals are present. And this was a group of 40 ASD children compared to 40 unaffected and unrelated controls. And I liked it because they also included unaffected siblings of those ASD children, 20 of them. What they showed was that the mothers with ASD children had a significantly higher number of mercury-containing amalgams versus healthy control members. And they went and showed that there was probably some other mercury exposure potentials. But the really important thing that I think gets us away from the belief that the heavy metal is perhaps the causation is the reality that the siblings showed no difference from non-sibling controls. So whether they were related and raised in the same home or not related and unaffected, both the siblings and the unaffected unrelateds did not have any elevation in the mercury level. And so mom was not equally passing on the mercury burden from her amalgams or from her environment to the children within the home. So there's other factors involved than just exposure to heavy metals. And so we're going to delve into kind of some of the pattern. But first I want to really way back out because there's always a huge danger. And this is what I did in academia, and I want to protect us from this accident. But I spent 17 years in academic medicine, and every single year I was there, I went further down a single rabbit hole to try to find more funding for a single protein, etc. And so I got this huge 17-year-old broad education in medicine and 3 subspecialties of medicine and everything else, and I boiled that down to this tiny little myopic view of the world through my own protein that I was studying, which was CoopTF1. Anybody ever heard of CoopTF1? Totally irrelevant, totally useless. I spent 17 years of my life building that knowledge base to get me there. I was like one of 5 people in the world that cared. So when I spoke, they had to fly me to Japan and speak to 6 people there or someplace else in the far-flung world because it was so unimportant. But that's absolutely why I got funding, is because I was one of the 5 people in the world that cared about CoopTF1 and how it related to cancer and how it was going to help something. And so that rabbit hole effect we need to watch out for in the autistic community or any other community. I speak broadly to all kinds of different physician groups and consumer groups around many different topics, and I see it over and over again that people can fall down the trap of being a Miralax support group or being an autism support group or whatever it is, and you start to see the world through the filter of autism. And I think that we lose the opportunity to see root cause when we go down those rabbit holes, and that's certainly what's happened in medicine. Your physicians are all super well-meaning people, and many of you have found brilliant and really enlightened physicians to help you and your children on your journey. But I'd say myself, not being an enlightened doctor 10 years ago, creating chemotherapy and being so far away from the root cause of anything, I can tell you that I was still very well-meaning, and I still loved my patients. I still hugged them every time I saw them. And so I was a well-meaning human being that was just had the wrong pieces of the puzzle, and I want to make sure we don't do this with the autistic evaluation here. And so we have epidemics that go way beyond autism that are all rising at a very similar rate. Obviously, autism is probably one of the most stunning with that rate of rise, and I think threatens much of our fabric of society. But if you go on down to the bottom with major depression at 1 in 2 adults in prevalence, cancer now 1 in 2 males in America, and that doesn't even count skin cancer. If you count skin cancer, we're over 65% of males with cancer. Dementia, an amazing study came out of the University of Virginia looking at early signs of dementia, looked across the population from age 12 to 90, looked across 2,000 people with really highly sensitive neurocognitive testing, and showed, unfortunately, that by age 28, the entire population was showing early signs of dementia. And so the 100% number here, I think, is actually really accurate. And I think all of us are experiencing this on some level. Raise your hand if you think you're functioning right now today at your optimal brain function. Never been better. Really? Nobody? Okay. I would totally agree with that. I think that all of us can recall a time just 10 years ago where we were functioning at a higher level neurologically, and we were forgetting less things, we were better at multitasking, we were less annoying to hang out with because we weren't doing 4 things. I'm always doing this. Like, you're doing the pat down to figure out if you got everything every time you walk out of a room. And so we have a serious problem across the board that goes way past the autism. Now, you guys have seen these graphs ad nauseum, and obviously in the last 3 years have seen some stunning increases in those numbers. But I want to point out that cancer is really traveling on a very similar trajectory. This is 1990 to 2005. And so you've got this very similar steep trajectory of cancer. And I'm really, as a former cancer researcher, well, actually a current cancer researcher in a different realm, the reality is that cancer takes probably 15 to 20 years to really grow in a population. And so when we see linear growth like this, we know we've seen something really dramatic happen some 15, 20 years ago. And when we see an acute syndrome like this that's leading the charge, we can bet that we're going to see a similar sudden vertical rise in the cancer rates some 3, 5, 10 years out. And so I think we're, 2025, 2030, we're going to start going vertical, not linear, with that growth of cancer in our adult and children populations. And so we have a really stunning situation. And so when we back up to that level and we say what could possibly be the root cause of all of this, the obvious thing is inflammation, okay? And so this was one of my aha moments in 2008 that started to turn my tide from designing chemo to starting a nutrition clinic, is I started to see cancer cells. This happened in a single day. I was looking at cancer cells under a microscope. I was running late for clinic, ran over to clinic, and my first patient that had been waiting too long for me pulled off his boot, and he had this huge diabetic ulcer in his ankle. And so I was debriding this infected ulcer, and I was stank, and it was nasty, and I was frustrated at first, but as I relaxed and was looking, actually started to look and be present with what I was seeing, his ankle and the dead tissue there adjoining the healthy tissue that was trying to grow in looked exactly like the abutment of normal tissue and cancer next to it. And so suddenly realized, wait a second, are we actually not even looking at different diseases? Is a diabetic ulcer really ultimately the exact same process that you would see with cancer? So that was a sudden realignment where I kind of got yanked out of the rabbit hole and had to say, oh, hold on a second, is it possible there's only one disease? And I believe today, 10 years later, that's absolutely the case. There's only one disease, if you want to call something a disease, and that's chronic inflammation. And all of these other things that we pull out of that, from autism to depression to diabetes, are all symptoms of one process. And this is why you can reverse ASD. This is why perhaps that you can reverse cancer. You can reverse diabetes. If it was truly a disease that was genetic and locked in, you would be irreversible, right? And so the fact that we can reverse these things really are pointing to the truth that there is an inflammatory process back there that is really the root cause, and everything else is just symptoms. So let's take a look at this word inflammation for a minute. The biology or biochemistry of it is really around this word oxidative stress. And all of you have experienced psychosocial stressors or financial stressors, and you have a sense of what that feels like. I would say in a nutshell, the word stress in that psychosocial kind of environment or your financial stress, what you're feeling is, I'm behind the 8 ball. I can't catch up. I don't have what it takes to get me over there. And that's exactly what happens at the tissue level when we shift from acute inflammation, which is one of the most important biologic activities for longevity, health, and thrive. Acute inflammation is super good for you. An example of really good acute inflammation is if I go and hop off this stage just one step down, I just caused tens of thousands, if not millions, of fractures in my femur. At the microscopic level, with that one jarring step, I just caused a whole bunch of fractures. That's now calling in osteoclasts, which are going to chew up that broken bone, and an osteoblast behind it, which will lay down a new bone. And the very cool thing about exercise and fracturing your bone at the microscopic level is it makes it stronger, not weaker. And so acute inflammation, when it's done right, always makes you stronger, not weaker. That's really super exciting. What it means that if we can keep a reservoir of coping mechanisms to maintain acute inflammation, we never get diseased. And so that's the exciting shift that you can start to think about in an ASD or a cancer or any other condition that you're looking at is, can we shift from chronic inflammation back to acute inflammation? So what is chronic inflammation? This is oxidative stress where you've accumulated too much positive charge. It's as simple as this. I've come so far out of the rabbit hole that I've boiled human health and disease down to one truth, which is disease is positive charge, health is negative charge. That's it. That is ridiculously simple. And it's ridiculously beautiful. And I'm going to go into a couple pictures and show you how cool this is, that negative charge is really the story of health. What happens is you start to have enough acute inflammatory reactions where you're injuring and you're injuring and you're injuring, just like a debit card or a credit card. You keep credit carding, and pretty soon you have debt that you can't keep up with, and now you have financial stress. Same exact process at the tissue level. Injury, injury, injury. You're spending resources. You're spending resources at the tissue level that are running out, and as soon as you run out, you start to accumulate positive charge, you get shut down and overwhelmed with the antioxidant system, and you can't recover. And that's the kind of scenario we see in Western medicine, and we say, well, you've got diabetes, you've got cancer, there's nothing we can do about it, you're way too far down this avenue, and the truth is we can shift that. One more simple truth. So positive charge is disease, negative charge is health. It goes right along with this. Chronic inflammation equals a loss of communication. All right, we're going to come back to the topic of communication at the cell level frequently because it's incredibly true. But it's something to keep in the back of your mind in case I don't come back to it, is a really cool thing that you can see on the macro level, is that chronic inflammation at the human being's communication level is still due to the loss of communication. So if you see somebody who's inflamed in their rhetoric, I doubt you've seen anybody in the recent year that's been focusing on inflammatory rhetoric. But in this small chance that you caught something on CNN or something else that sounded like somebody was really flying off the handle, that chronic inflammatory speech is due, I believe, to the exact same process, which is a loss of communication. Because we're not talking as humans anymore and we're spending all of our time tweeting and staring at internet screens and everything else, we've stopped communicating. That's why Autism 1 is so critical. It's one thing for us to be emailing each other and sending articles. It's a whole other thing for us to get together 1,000 people and hug the hell out of each other. That's what creates the gravity for change, is humans touching each other, humans communicating, humans seeing each other and telling each other, you are beautiful, you are perfect. No matter what labels have been put on you or anything else, you are beautiful, you are perfect, you're here right now, therefore you are here with great purpose. And so that is, I think, something that we can take a lesson from. If you see somebody who's flipping out in your environment, family member, friend, coworker, boss, it doesn't matter, politician, you can bet that at the tissue level, they're experiencing the same thing. And we saw this in the campaign last year. They got sicker, they always do. Anybody who runs 24/7 on planes and is getting worked into the ground and everything else, they're going to get sicker. And what you see is their communication system fails under this overwhelming positive charge. They start to mimic that with this inflammatory speech. And so you can bet at the tissue level you've got inflammation if you've got somebody who is really entrained into the inflammatory state with their language or beyond. So let's ask some really, now that we've got it this simple, we've come this far out of the rabbit hole, let's ask some really simple questions about what is the root cause of chronic inflammation. If it's that simple, that it's just a shift from acute to chronic inflammation, and that's the whole story of autism and everything else, what's the root cause? And so if we look across that spectrum, and you can't pick up a peer-reviewed journal article in Science now that's not telling you that all of those diseases are ultimately going to tie back to the gut-brain connection. Okay, so there's article after article after article saying the gut, the microbiome is affecting and predicting the outcomes and the occurrence of all of these conditions that we call diseases. And so that is a huge kind of red flag of, okay, do we have a root cause? If you can affect this many different systems, right? Autism, to allergies, to diabetes, to obesity, to asthma, to cancer, to dementia, all of that boils back to one environment. That's really telling, and it's something that we need to, as a nation, start really preaching to our government that you need to rearrange the CDC's funding. We need 99% of CDC funding to go to the gut biome because it's the root cause of frickin' everything. You need to stop spending money on cancer research. You need to stop spending anything on any neurologic research. Figure out the biome first. If we immediately shifted even 20% of our budget to the microbiome, we would have this stuff fixed so fast because there's so much money being dumped into COOP TF1 and other completely useless studies going on. And so we could really do good if we would shift it. So everything is gut-brain. So when we're talking about toxins now, a huge story that you guys probably know better than your doctors is detox pathways, right? And so there's all this data pointing to that autistic kids are defective in their detoxification pathways, and then you go to the Lyme patients, well, they're defective in their methylation pathways, and then you go to the chronic fatigue patients, they're defective in their pathways. The problem with this is that we keep looking at the human genome to give us this data on detoxification. Most of this has to do with methylation. When you methylate mercury, for example, or you methylate tin, it becomes a very volatile. It goes from a very stable kind of natus for inflammation and insult to the environment where it's building oxidative positive charge. Whereas if you methylate it, it becomes very volatile and it'll start to bind membranes, cross membranes, get excreted from the body much easier. So the organification is what we call this. When a mineral or a heavy metal gets organified, it's through a biologic process that's methylating and making it easier to clear. We used to think that methylation was always bad for these things. Like a methylated mercury is very volatile, meaning it's very oxidative. It looks like it's going to do more damage than good. But a lot of the recent data that I've been believing in is that once it is methylated, it's easier for it to clear, even though it appears at the biologic level to be perhaps even more dangerous. But as long as it's gone, it's going to do less harm than leaving a positive charge mercury deep in the spinal cord. The incredible thing that we keep ignoring is that 90% of the enzymatic work done in the body is performed by bacteria alone. That doesn't even take into consideration all the methylation that fungi and yeasts are doing for us. And so the reality is, when we start looking in a few minutes at this complexity of the ecosystem around you at the genomic level and the proteins that they build, we are way outstripped by the protein work, the enzyme work, by our microbiome than the human. And this is why MTHFR really doesn't hold up very well, right? So there's been this fad of diagnosing Lyme and chronic fatigue and ASD patients with MTHFR gene defects where we can't make the enzyme that goes and methylates things like B12 and folate. And so without that methylation pathway at the human level, we think, well, that's why they have disease. But then unfortunately, we look across the whole population and find that 40 to 60% of people have at least one of those alleles screwed up in the human genome. So if this was really the root of human health, we would not see so many people with the capacity for health. If MTHFR was really the causation of an inability to detox, we'd see a much different trajectory of these diseases in the population. And the reason I think there's this huge disconnect is I think that most of the methylation that's being done in the body is being done by a bacteria, fungi, or yeast, most of which we haven't even come close to identifying yet. So I think most of the methylation that happens in your body every day, you can't even imagine the quadrillions of reactions that are happening in your body every second. Quadrillions and quadrillions and quadrillions of reactions down to this methylation level. And there's no way that human cells can be really responsible for all of that. Methylation, oxidation, detoxification can be done through those bacteria and fungi and yeast in many different things other than the methylation. But I already kind of touched on how those volatile compounds kind of come out. So this is another study looking at the microbiota and its ability to shift ASD in this case. But you can do the same thing for cancer and many, many other conditions. But this one was interesting. They took 18 children, and terrifying to me, they put them all on oral vancomycin for 2 weeks to annihilate much of their bacterial biome in the gut. And then they started them on a fecal microbial transplant program where they were given 1 day of very high-dose fecal microbial transplant with encapsulated stool, 2 arms. They had one group taking that by mouth and the other one taking it rectally by just capsule suppositories. And then they, for 14 days afterwards, followed that with a low-dose maintenance of daily FMT. And not surprisingly, once you know about the microbiome, they saw an improvement across all spectrums of these ASD patients. All their neurocognitive psych measures improved, verbal scores all the way down to kind of the neuromuscular excitation and a lot of those things improving. And so they showed a benefit. And I guarantee you they would have seen that benefit if they hadn't given oral vancomycin, and my guess is they would have seen a much better benefit to that. Because in fact, I don't think the kid's microbiome is going to be selectively improved with just a single broad-spectrum antibiotic. I think that it's much more complicated, and it really comes down to adding that huge complexity that was added with the fecal transplant in this case. This was a 2017 article in Microbiome just a couple months ago published. So lots of this data coming out now, this relationship. Less obvious. I mean, for the autistic kiddos, you know they have nutrition deficiencies, you know they have heavy metal exposure, you know they have detox pathway issues. So thinking about microbials for them is maybe a no-brainer. But I can guarantee you for a cancer researcher, it seems still like craziness to think that the microbes are doing something very specific about the risk of your cancer and the behavior of your cancer cells. This study just came out in 2014 and was really, I think, the best to date to show just how dumbfounding our relationship with bacteria is. And you probably can't read it from where you're at, but what it shows is that if you go and biopsy a breast cancer in a woman and look at the bacterial DNA that's in that tumor, so the bacteria present in that tumor at the DNA level, what you'll find is this methylbacterium radiotolerans, very enriched in the tumor tissue. You then biopsy the same woman's other breast, the healthy breast, where there's no cancer, and what you find is not that methylbacterium, you see Sphingomonas. And so this Sphingomonas bacteria looks to be very, very important for maintaining normal breast physiology. How many of you know that there's bacteria all through your breast? I had no idea, no clue. For me as a physician, if bacteria were anything other than on your skin or in your gut, we call it cellulitis, it's life-threatening, and it can kill you. But in fact, what a stunning reality that Sphingomonas is alive and well and thriving in the healthy breast tissue of the woman, and if she's going to get breast cancer, she's going to lose the Sphingomonas and she's going to get methylbacterium. And of course, the initial articles that were coming out around this topic assumed that the methylbacterium was causing harm, that sucker was the thing that was causing cancer in the breast. But then this study then answered the fact that no, it doesn't look like that is the case, because what they then did is looked at the severity of the cancer. And so as the grade of the cancer went from stage 1 localized breast disease to metastatic and really life-threatening and fatal, the more aggressive the cancer, the more sterile it got. Methylbacterium disappeared. Oh my gosh. Methylbacterium showed up as a last line of defense in an acidic, positively charged breast to try to save the day. Well, that's actually a no-brainer when you look at what these two bacteria do. Sphingomonas is an aerobic, will use oxygen to process fuel in the tissue environment, whereas the methylbacterium is going to be a fermenting agent, be able to ferment rather than use oxygen. So as the tissue becomes deprived of oxygen because you've had too much chronic injury at the cell level in this space, you start to need methylbacterium to move in to try to save the day. Well, if it still gets worse and you haven't changed the environment and things are getting more and more acidic and more deprived, eventually methylbacterium can't keep up either, and you go sterile, and now you've got stage 4 metastatic cancer, which is sterile. Whoa, what a relationship to bacteria do we have? Goosebumps. Terrifying that we're throwing kids for a clinical trial on 14 days of vancomycin for no known reason or rationale. When we annihilate bacteria, we take away our nurture. The stunning thing that we're going to show you right now is that the human cell has almost nothing to do with the human biology. Where did the gut ecosystem go to? If we're so sick, if we are mounting disease at the rates that we are doing right now, where did it all go? And certainly as a physician, I have played my role. This is antibiotics in 2011 in just the United States alone. On the right, this is 2001. This is humans being treated by their doctors. 7.7 million, not prescriptions, 7.7 million pounds of antibiotic prescribed in a single year. When I saw this, I was like, well, fortunately, it's been flat. Like, doctors haven't gotten more insane since 2001 to 2011. And so that was really reassuring until I found an article from the same time period here which showed this. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine, and it showed U.S. healthcare providers were prescribing 258 million courses of antibiotics in 2010, or 833 prescriptions per 1,000 persons. 83% of the population numerically getting exposed to an antibiotic in a single year. That's why that line is flat. It's literally impossible for doctors to get more prescriptions out. We saturated the antibiotic disbursement methodology. We couldn't go any higher. Animals keep going up. 30 million pounds used in meat production alone in the United States in 2011. So some 3-4 times higher than what we were seeing in human consumption. This is a really gross slide. This is nations, Norway, Sweden, Austria, and not surprisingly, United States of America way over here. This is antibiotics used in meat production, and this unfortunately has a scale of milligrams per kilogram. To give you an idea of what that number is, it's 300 milligrams of antibiotic per kilogram of meat. 1/3 of the weight of the cow or pig in the form of antibiotic. 1/3 of the weight of the animal. Gross. That's the only word that's really left in the human language that could really capture that. That's gross. And it's kind of stunning who's right next to us. Greece is right here. The Greeks, are they inflamed right now or not inflamed, right? Netherlands, aren't they the ones that are supposed to be so clean? Aren't they supposed to be just spotless? What is going on in the world? We have taken a Western philosophy of chemical farming to Europe and beyond to really saturate the world globe of animals with these antibiotics. All right. Let's take a look at cancer death. This is all-cause cancer mortality, men and women in the United States in the 2007 to 2011 period. And so over those 4 years, the redder the state or the darker the state here, the more inflamed it gets, the more cancer death you have. So these are the highest rates of cancer in our country right here. And let's take a look at the antibiotic prescribing pattern in the United States. The darker, the better. State by state, you see a perfect correlation between cancer and antibiotic usage by the physicians. But I don't think this is causative. I think it's adding fuel to the fire of that cancer pattern, but I don't think it's causative because these doctors are doing something here. They're not just prescribing antibiotics to healthy people. They're prescribing antibiotics because an immune system is failing or there's a biome already out of balance and there's something screwed up, and so the person has an infection of some sort. Of course, they are prescribing it for viruses and other things that the antibiotics do nothing for. But I would say that this is a symptom, again, that in the same place that you have cancer death, you have very high degrees of microbial imbalance, and the doctors are trying to just adapt to that by giving prescriptions of antibiotics. But in reality, I think we're again seeing a symptom here. What is underlying this environment where everything is getting wiped out? Why are we seeing this correlation across disease patterns? And I would argue, and I think Stephanie Seneff would agree, and others in the room here, that glyphosate is probably the causative agent. And so many of you know this thing better than anybody else on earth, but glycine is the backbone. Glycine is a critical amino acid for building proteins. There's only 26 of these guys. We don't have a whole huge cadre of these, and so we need every amino acid we can get. And so glycine is then replaced by what we call an organophosphate by the addition of a phosphate group here and an amine on the other side. And so now you have an organophosphate molecule that is now taking up space where we should have had glycine. We now have a toxin. And the terrifying thing about this organophosphate is its mechanism of disbursement. This is one of the very few toxins on Earth that is water soluble. That's a real disaster because most toxins on Earth are fat soluble, which means they can be sequestered away by mycelium in the soil or by immune cells in your gut or by your liver or the fat cells in your body that are absorbing it so it doesn't end up in the brain and elsewhere. Water soluble means that sucker stays in play at every layer of the ecosystem, no matter what biology you're looking for. And so this is the terrifying thing that's happened on the planet, is this chemical has now infiltrated every nook and cranny. Why does glyphosate work? What the heck is it doing? It blocks a pathway, an enzyme pathway, that builds a very critical aromatic amino acid pattern that builds into our aromatic amino acids that will be like phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, and the rest. This pathway is what Monsanto and all the chemical companies, you know now it's not just Monsanto, right? It went off patent in 2007, now Dow and all of the chemical companies in the US, 5 major ones make glyphosate, but the vast majority of glyphosate on the planet is produced in China now and pennies on the dollar and distributed to massive amounts to the world. Australasia opened up their free trade, and suddenly, right when the glyphosate was coming off patent being made in China, Australia suddenly signed a free trade agreement, and so with zero trade tariffs and everything else, they were getting glyphosate on the pennies. Since then, 2007 to today, Australia has exceeded all of our childhood statistics in disease. They're going faster than we are. They are now at 1 in 4 children with asthma in that country. And so they have a massive disaster going on as this chemical got introduced to their environment. But imagine not only just taking away glycine from your biology, but also removing all of these other critical amino acids that are going to take away your ability to make proteins. This is the most terrifying part of the whole thing for me, is the alkaloids. The alkaloids are made through the shikimate enzyme pathway. Oh, and I got sidetracked with my talk on the other companies. Let me circle back for a second on the shikimate pathway again. The reason why Monsanto and all the chemical companies have been saying that this is a totally safe chemical for humans is we don't have a shikimate pathway. We don't have the enzymes that can make these compounds. And so they say, well, it can't hurt a human because you don't have the target of the drug, or you don't have the target of the toxin. Well, let's take a second and pause and say, okay, well, if we don't have the shikimate pathway, where would we get all the things made from the shikimate pathway? And the answer is obviously the bacteria and the plants that we grow in the soils of those bacteria. And so we took away what we would call the essential amino acids, the ones that we can't make in our own body have to be made through the shikimate pathway. And so we're taking away the only amino acids that we can't even build. And so there's a huge downstream biologic effect of blocking the shikimate pathway, where now the food that we eat can't bring those essential amino acids into our diet anymore. But the alkaloids are more stunning. The alkaloids are a whole family of compounds that are really rich in the colorful fruits and vegetables that have all of the medicinal property of food. Oldest, statement in medicine, going back to Hippocrates and the rest, is let thy food be thy medicine. For all time in human history, it has been our medicine until about 1976. We started stealing it away, and then by the 1990s, we were depleting our food of its medicinal properties by stealing away the shikimate pathway that would make the alkaloids. These alkaloids have anti-parasitic compounds in them. They have anti-asthma, anti-cancer, anti-cholinometics, i.e. neurotransmitter balancing. They have pro-vasodilatory things, anti-hypertensive, anti-arrhythmics to prevent heart attacks. They have analgesics to treat pain. They are anti-hyperglycemics to prevent diabetes. What would happen to the population if we put a chemical into the food chain at 2 billion kilograms a year that took away the medicinal properties of food? Seems like we would see a lot of spectrum disorder, cancer, asthma, parasitic conditions like Lyme, a lot of chronic pain conditions, a ton of diabetes, and a ton of heart attacks. I don't like conspiracy theory. I like human behavior and studying it. Human behavior is all the same as conspiracy theory. We do stupid things. That's just as simple as I can figure out humans so far. We just do stupid things. And so the stupid things we've done was we form a chemical company that is a pharmaceutical company called Pharmaca, and then eventually they would snag up Monsanto seeing a perfect business plan. What if we had a chemical at the farming level that would remove medicinals from the food, making everybody dependent on the pharmaceuticals? And so they moved in with all the pharmaceuticals to address all those levels. Well, that's a perfect business plan in the end. Is it stupid? Yes, it is. Is it a conspiracy? I don't know. It's probably just stupid. But it's really predictable pattern here, is that we took away the alkaloids through that blocking the shikimate pathway, and we develop all those diseases. Glyphosate usage worldwide, I just hit the number for you, 2015, 2 billion kilograms of glyphosate used worldwide. 2 billion kilograms of anything is ridiculous, let alone a water-soluble toxin that can go into every cycle of the ecosystem. All right, so let's take a look now. I'm going to shift gears now from talking about kind of the nutritional aspects of destruction from that, and we're going to take a look at what is the microbiome and the genomics kind of aspects that we're looking at here. I am going to propose to you that you have 3 conceptions, not 1. Your first conception involves mom and dad getting together, having maybe too much alcohol or whatever was the trigger, and they suddenly consummate what will be a sperm and an ova coming together to become a single-celled organism. And that single-celled organism then has to proliferate into a 70 trillion cell organism that's all going to differentiate. Your liver is going to become your liver, your eyeball is going to become your eyeball. Super cool, crazy story that I could talk for hours on that piece. So beautiful thing. 70 trillion cells, some people say 100 trillion cells, doesn't really matter. It's a big, big number. It's only slightly larger than our national debt, but it's a big number. 20,000 genes. That's a dismally low number. 20,000 genes is 2/3 of the number of genes a flea has. A flea has 30,000 genes. So when we finally decoded the human genome to find out that we're now less than 20,000. It's like 19,000. Some people think as low as 18,000. We have no genes, which is weird because we have 200,000 proteins to code for, and we just assumed one gene made one protein. Well, that was totally bizarre information. A fruit fly has 13,000 genes. So I like those statistics because there's a lot of days as a mom or a dad where you wake up and you're just like, I am so off today. I am not going to be able to survive this day. And then you can just sit there and remind yourself, I'm only twice as complicated as a flea, or 2/3 as complicated as a flea. I'm only twice as complicated as a fruit fly. I'm doing pretty good. Look, I got a little bit of food on the table for my kids. I kind of vacuumed a little bit, and then I lost my keys for half an hour, and I ran around for that. And then I went to the bank, find out I had no money, and then I came home. There were some peanut butter sandwiches, I think, and then we all fell in bed. And that's not bad for 20,000 genes. But fortunately, there's a second birth that we have. The mitochondria are our second conception, where we get a new pool of DNA from these guys. The mitochondria are entirely from mom. You're going to find out that dad is already out of the picture. Like, he was useful for getting the alcohol, and that was pretty much it. And so the mitochondria hit, and you've got 37 genes, which sounds very simple, and it is, and not very complicated system here, but there's 14 quadrillion of those suckers. 14 quadrillion versus 70 trillion. So you're some 200-fold increase logarithmically beyond your number. So there's mitochondria inside of you that are helping protect you and detox you and turn on and off apoptosis and program cell suicide and all these inflammatory pathways. These guys are brilliant at not just making fuel, these guys are brilliant at doing injury response. So these guys are all about maintaining this acute inflammation versus chronic inflammation shift. If it wasn't for these guys, that single-cell organism would never reach 70 trillion. That fetus would die every time if there weren't enough mitochondria to make the redox signaling environment, these little positive-negative charges that are the dominoes of communication across the cell environment. There is a third conception. The third conception is when that baby travels down a birth canal and is birthed down mom's vaginal canal and is suddenly exposed to all the vaginal flora of mom's birth canal. That does not happen anymore. 47% of births in the United States are by C-section. I did my OBGYN rotation as my first one because it's the only experience I had in medicine before that was working in a pre- and postnatal care clinic over in the Philippines where I was birthing babies in the squalor of the squats of the Philippines. Dirty, everything, all those babies thrived. I never saw asthma, I never saw allergies. They all were 1.5 pounds when they were born. They survived anyways. They had no antibiotics. They hardly had any food. The darn kids are playing soccer 5 years later. You know, it's just like they're just bulletproof. And then my first rotation, my very first experience, I was so excited. It was my first day of third year of medical school. I was about to see a patient for the first time, and I had a beeper on, and there's nothing cooler back in the day than having a beeper. And so I had my pager on, and it goes off. I'm just like, amazing. And I call, and my resident's like, you're already going too slow, run. And so I'm like running down these halls and run into the emergency room because there's some woman in labor. There's some woman dying. She just overdosed on cocaine. She's hemorrhaging. She's at 8 months pregnant, and we do a crash C-section. We roll her straight from the ER to the closest OR. It took about 45 seconds to get her into the OR. Nobody was in gowns or anything else. The fellow literally dumped a bunch of betadine on her belly to sterilize the environment. 32 seconds from skin to baby. It was like carnage. I mean, just slicing this woman open, grab the baby by the head and pull this thing out as mom died on the table. Baby's fine, heart beating, breathing. 8 months into that pregnancy, that baby only survived 3 more days. Never saw mom's bacteria, died of MRSA pneumonia. That baby inherited hospital flora instead of mom's flora. Never had a fighting chance because it didn't have a third conception. It was born sterile. Now, every patient I see in clinic, my first question is, how were you born? And it's unbelievable how many were either born by C-section or were born by traumatic birth that was prolonged so their mom got antibiotics while they were in the birth canal. Birthing sterile babies guarantees you're going to have chronic inflammation in the future. You just set that kiddo on a rough course. Really cool shift is happening in OBGYN right now. If they're born by C-section, they swab down mom's vaginal canal and stick that swab up the baby's nose, all over their mouth, all over their head. They coat the baby in mom's vaginal flora. Brilliant, but just a stepping stone, because really what should have happened, it should have been 25 hours in the birth canal exposed to all kinds of anaerobes and aerobes and a complex thing. But at least we're moving in the right direction to say maybe mom's vaginal environment is important for birth. We're really moving forward rapidly. So we looked at the human genome. We said there's 20,000 genes, pretty pathetic. There's 40,000 species of bacteria, though, and there are 2 million genes there. 2 million bacterial genes in the genome of the bacterial biome. We are so profoundly outnumbered genetically by these guys. That's why when we start studying things like MTHFR, I know we're just chipping away at the tip of an iceberg that is 100 times larger than the human genome, just with the bacterial enzymatic capacity. And so we have totally misguided our concepts of what the genome looks like. The genome is not just human, it's 2 million bacteria that have the potential to change us. 300,000 species of parasites on the planet. 300,000 species. And each of them have about 5,000 genes, and so we're looking at 1.5 billion different genes in the parasitic kingdom. 1.5 billion. We think of parasites as bad. No, parasites are critical. We've shown that there's a parasite that lives underneath the healthy eyelid. Weird looking worm little dude. Little forelegs on it and everything, little sucker mouth. This cute little dude, if he's not under your eyelid, you get eye disease immediately. This guy is critical to ocular health. And so parasites have a genome that are secreting things that we need. And so we need to stop thinking of these guys as all harmful. There are 5 million species of fungi. 40,000 species of bacteria, 5 million species of fungi. 5 million have 125 trillion genes. You getting the numbers here? It is a little startling how outnumbered we are genetically. This is the craziest thing. We haven't even estimated how many species of virus we have on the planet. You want to know how many viruses are now estimated, though? We do know a total number of viruses based on a lot of different cool studies. Total number of viruses on Earth, 10 to the 31. Who knows how to count that number? 10 to 31, that's 1 with 31 zeros after it. A billion has 9 zeros, right? So 31 zeros after a 1. How many is that? That is 10 million times more viruses than our stars in the entire universe. There are 10 million times more viruses with us here today than our stars in the entire universe. If they were against us, they would win. Instantly. I am convinced every day more that these things that we keep thinking of pathogens are actually our environment. And if they are causing apparent harm, it's because we are so out of balance, we need them. I think we need Lyme. I think we need all of these bizarre bacteria. I think MRSA plays an important, Pseudomonas we know has this critical role of detoxing the planet. Pseudomonas, which causes all these horrible hospital-acquired infections, it's the thing that we take over to Fukushima to clean up radioactive material. Pseudomonas loves eating radioactive material all day long. It loves it. Detox machines. We're going to find out that there is no such thing as a pathogen. That article on the vancomycin I showed you, it was a whole page on why they were giving vancomycin to wipe out the pathogens And the guy's like, what pathogens? Like, you didn't need a third of that microbiome? That was just pathogen? Is that what we're going to call that? So it's just a misnomer. We need to stop looking at these guys as enemies and start to understand them as us. So all of that's amazing to look at the genes, but it's even crazier because some 99% of the human genome does not even encode for a protein. It's not even a gene. And so we've found about 8.2% of the human genome that has some sort of measurable function. So we've called the rest of it, the other 97.8 or whatever it is, junk DNA. Well, junk DNA does not exist as far as nature is concerned. There's no way nature wasted the energy of making 90% of the genome as junk. And so this was the birth of microRNA. Epigenetics was the realization that methylation patterns from bacteria and other pieces of the environment could modify the way that a gene will make a protein. And we now know through epigenetics you can make one gene make 200 different proteins, depending on what kind of methylation patterns you have. Bigger story coming out is microRNA. MicroRNA don't code for proteins. They're a little strand of RNA that gets encoded from the DNA, goes out into the bloodstream, and travels to distant sites to turn on and off genes somewhere else. And so your liver, it sees an noxious agent. It can send microRNA out to the brain and have the brain make adjustments in the parasympathetic nervous system to change gut motility. Crazy cool story that 90% of the genome is the on-off switches for all the other genes. And very, very cool is those are the guys that seem to go distances. These are the long-term communication pattern for it. Crazy studies coming out on these microRNA now. John Gilday, who I introduced at the beginning, is one of the top 5 researchers in the world on microRNA. He can pull it out of saliva, out of urine. I mean, it's crazy the data we can get. But these are some of the other studies that we haven't published, just so you don't have to take everything from us. 15% of the microRNA in your circulation right now, the on-off switches, 15% of them in your body right now are from the bacteria in your gut or in your environment. They're going to your DNA. They are going to your human DNA from the bacterial DNA, and they're turning on and off your genes. Crazy story, 15% of the microRNA in your bloodstream is from fungi. I was told fungus is always bad for human health. No, it's absolutely regulating all kinds of critical features of who you are. The body that you sit in today is at least 30% programmed by just bacteria and fungi. That doesn't even count the viruses yet. We don't even need to know how to take them into consideration yet. Not only that, we're only counting the microRNA that we've decoded the genes and the genome of these bacteria. So there's a lot of microRNA that's sitting there in our circulation that we can't even identify as that. Human, bacterial, we don't know yet. But already we know that at least 30% of your on-off switches are from the bacteria and fungi in your environment. And crazy story evolving is 5% of your microRNA, I'm sure this number is going to go way up because we just started this process, from the food you eat. So the nucleus or the DNA structure of the cow made microRNA that's now turning off or on your genes. Our company is producing a gut product for large-scale agriculture, and so for livestock and feeding feedlots and everything else to try to bring some decrease in stress to these animals. And I've had the opportunity in doing so to stand amongst 100,000 cows at once. And that is an experience that really is humbling because you've really never felt that much biologic mass around you. 100,000 cows at 1,000 pounds apiece is a lot of biology. And none of them look very happy with the humans. And they are very much ASD animals. They behave almost identical to my ASD patients in clinic. They're skittish, they can't make eye contact, they're totally nervous of anything coming at them. Something comes from the periphery. They are just not the cows that are growing on the countryside hills of Virginia where I live. They are a different neurologic species. They were fine one day and then they get put in a feedlot and within days they become ASD. And so that reality is speaking to this shift that we are eating stressed out animals. What microRNA turn on when the animal is in chronic stress? All of the wrong ones. What would happen if you ate a hamburger that was a stressed out piece of meat that had all the wrong microRNA? Would you become less stressed or more stressed? It's a really important thing for us to start to consider when we talk about nutrition. We are talking about genomic information. We're no longer talking about macroproteins and macronutrients. It's not about the calcium in it. It's about what are the microRNA saying. Was the plant that grew that tomato even touching the earth? Or was it hydroponically grown in water? That's a stressed out tomato. Okay? And you don't want to piss off a tomato. What time do we have there? 3:44. All right. I need to wrap up pretty quick because we've got a lot of good stuff coming from here. So I'm going to speed by this one. This is your gene pool in short. This is your entire gene pool. You had better start treading lightly is the message to humans. We have got to stop doing the damage. So now we're going to look real quick at the mechanisms and the relationship between the biome and inflammation. Inflammation comes from the immune system, obviously. 60 to 70% of your immune system sits in your GALT, the gastrointestinal associated lymphatic tissue, which is all this purple tissue in the villi and everything else. That accounts for some 80% of the antibody production in your whole body. It is protected by one layer of cells called the epithelium. That epithelium is a border on that whole gut. It has a surface area of about 2 tennis courts, and it's 50 microns thick. If you put a human hair next to it, it's half the width of a human hair. Your entire barrier from your food chain, as toxic as it may be, and your bloodstream is half the width of a human hair. That's your protection mechanism. Seems like a really bad design flaw. No, it is absolutely the perfect design flaw. So if we start going stupid and we start screwing with Mother Nature, there is a checks and balances in place that says we're going to kill ourselves very quickly so that we can't be stupid for too long on this planet. And so I think that half a hair protection was God's way of saying, watch yourself. Don't take yourself so freaking seriously. You're part of a huge complex ecosystem that's bigger than you. And so it turns out that the tight junctions between those microscopic cells are the barrier between you and the rest of the world, not just at the gut, but in your blood-brain barrier, every blood vessel, and importantly, the kidneys that are supposed to detox you. Here's what happens with glyphosate. This is small intestine on the left. This is 16 minutes later after 20 parts per million of glyphosate is introduced. This is a solid membrane, very protective. This one has fallen apart. That's leaky gut on a profound degree. 20 parts per million is what you'd see on a typical beet, or it would be what you would see on a typical sweet potato at the grocery store grown through conventional methods. So we're using dietary amounts. Who knows anything about gluten sensitivity? Woo! Gluten sensitivity, where the heck did that come from in 1992? So this is tight junctions on the left, all glued together. On the right, you can't see it because of the lights. But suffice it to say that you've now got railroad tracks. You've got tight junctions on this cell and tight junctions on this cell, but they are no longer touching. You have huge leaky gut. Very similar mechanism. And it turns out that that leads to this huge inflammatory reaction in the gut because now everything you eat turns into a problem for your immune system to deal with because it wasn't supposed to get there in that form. I hate allergy testing. I hate it, I hate it, hate it. Because all it's going to show you is the last 3 months of what went through that membrane. You're not allergic to anything. You just have a leaky membrane. All right. As soon as that injury happens at the gut level, it then goes systemic. Zonulin and other peptides go and tear apart the tight junctions in every blood vessel, the blood-brain barrier, the kidney tubules. So you're a leaky sieve on the front end, and our kids are turning into toxic sponges, and you can't get it ejected out the back end with the kidney tubules because you can't hold water appropriately. Therefore, you can't have an electrical charge. Therefore, you can't detox. Water is the story of detoxification. There's many, many compounds here in this building that are saying that they are detox compounds. Nothing is a detox compound if it doesn't affect water. And so that's a good question to ask. If you've got a product that's saying, well, hey, we detox things, well, how do you get water inside the cell? If you can't get water inside the cell, you can't detox anything. All right, so what is the population results of all this? Loss of bacteria was step one. We started in the 1940s with antibiotics, and then by the 1960s, we were growing crappy food and needed pesticides and herbicides. By 1976, we hit glyphosate, and then by 1996 we had GMO glyphosate-ready crops, and then we have loss of a genomic regulation of detox and repair. We have destruction of tight junctions and protection across our bodies. We're all leaking all over the place. Let's look at cancer from 1970 to 1994. Population statistics of cancer should never change. They should be the most stable public health statistic we have. 1970 to 1994, this is a male death from cancer. This is colon cancer, prostate cancer, and this is colon, lung, prostate cancer. Notice that it's all in these kind of coastlines, northern populations. And what this proved from 1970 to 1994 was voting Democrat caused cancer. But amazingly, somebody found an antidote to that problem, and suddenly, by 2007 to 2011, it was actually voting Republican caused cancer. And so it was a very interesting population shift that happened in cancer death. This is our state-by-state cancer pattern. It is drastically different than just 20 years ago. That should raise red flags at the CDC to no end. If you can change population statistics in cancer death, there is something in the water. We did something to vastly change the way the disease goes. Remember, cancer rates didn't go down in these states. They went up. But it went up so high here that it went like this. So we've seen cancer rates go from 1 in 9 to 1 in 2 over the same period of time. Explosion of cancer, and the patterns in which the cancer is happening is terrifying. Let's overlap the glyphosate patterns. So this is 1992, 2011. Lots of spraying, and it doesn't overlap very well with this, so I was very perturbed. I was like, I know this is involved. Has to be. But then you find out it's a water-soluble toxin, and it took me 3 months, and usually an audience member in 3 seconds says, Mississippi River. And so you guys are always smarter than the doctor. And so let me show you the Mississippi River. This is the tributaries of the Mississippi River overlaid. It looks like a tornado down at the bottom. Sucks all of the glyphosate out of the whole growing pattern here and puts it all down into this little strip right here. Last 90 miles of that Mississippi River, Baton Rouge to New Orleans, Cancer Alley. Highest rates of cancer in the developed world, right there. Boom. In St. Louis, yeah. St. Louis is where glyphosate was first produced. And so you've got this pattern that overlaps perfectly with the concentrations. So we're taking a really exciting trip. We're doing a documentary film in July, August, where we're starting at the headwaters of the Mississippi and sampling water all the way down and taking stories from the people who are on the shores and the banks of that river to tell the story of what's happening to cause that. This is women's mortality from 93 to 2006, kind of overlapping that time with glyphosate. If it's red, it's a county where women's health is decreased in quality and life expectancy. If it's blue, or it's improved. And so what you see, again, very much like the glyphosate spraying map, you've got northern farming environments there, but then you get this huge concentration down through the same 5 states for women's health and death there. This is the autistic map, and this comes from an article that was literally saying we are terrible at measuring the rates of autism state by state. It was literally saying we're not measuring this in most states, and the areas that are not measuring it at all is right here. And so this article really is good at saying, holy smokes, the only reason we have any population statistics doesn't have anything to do with the disease. It has to do with how much money has been spent on support groups or support systems for the autistic community. And that's why we have that map. It does actually pretty well overlap with that spraying map, but it will be perfect when we actually start measuring it, and start reporting it county by county. This is something Stephanie Seneff and others have put together here, glyphosate and autism. This is the number of acres sprayed on GMO corn and soybean worldwide, and that's the rate of autism going underneath that. And so what we have here is an amazing moment where Mother Earth revealed something. Mother Earth is absolutely our angel. This is taken from outer space, and there's a frickin' halo over Mother Earth's head right there. It's beautiful. Mother Earth is our angel, and she anticipated our stupidity, and she put something into the soil 50 million years ago. And so our big breakthrough, I'm speeding through because we don't have time, but this was our big breakthrough from Mother Earth. And so we found in 50 million-year-old soil a family of molecules that have a redox potential. We were talked about the oxygen, hydrogen, and the positive and negative charge. This had the potential to really do something special for cancer. I knew that as soon as I saw the molecule from William, and I said, that's going to act a lot like the chemotherapy I used to make. I don't know why it's in the soil. A few months later, we found out it was being made by bacteria. And it turns out every species of bacteria makes a different snowflake family of these. And we have over millions of these different variants from fungi and bacteria that we're sucking out of the soil now. And when you put that into play, we're calling it terahydrite as that active ingredient of over 1 million variations of these carbon-based redox signaling molecules. And these function as this interspecies communication network. This is the control membrane of the small intestine. You put the 20 parts per million of glyphosate, and that intestine falls apart in moments. In contrast, if you take the same membrane and you put glyphosate at the same time as that robust bacterial communication network from 50 million years ago, there is 0 damage. That is so robust of an antidote that we've taken it 20,000 times the nutritional, or actually not even nutritional, 20,000 times what EPA says is a toxic level of this, and we still see 0 damage on that membrane. Mother Nature put in her soil 50 million years ago an antidote to what we would put into our soils today to destroy ourselves and her. That's grace. I think if you look it up in Webster's, this is something to do with Monsanto. grace has something to do with our big stupids. And so this is really an exciting thing. And so we've now shown as a group that the same phenomenon happens with gluten. You do not have gluten sensitivity. You don't tear apart those membranes with that process if the terahydrite is present. Put them on at the same time, you get protection. So we have peer-reviewed journal articles at our booth on both of those that have been published now that we can protect against glyphosate injury, we can protect against gluten injury, and all of that. We've gone further. This is actually functional study showing you an ohm meter basically across that membrane to show you the resistance of a healthy membrane. You add the glyphosate, you lose 70% of the resistance. You add the terahydrite back in with the glyphosate, you actually get stronger. What does that sound like? That's acute inflammation. We just restored the acute inflammatory potential of the bowel wall. Injury means repair. It's redox molecule signaling potential. That's bringing back into balance the negative and positive charge, and if you can do that all day long, you can repair all day long. Mother Nature is graceful at every level. Gliadin from the gluten, same pattern. Breakdown, less repair because there was less injury. Very cool stuff. This is now a paper that's coming out pretty soon. This is showing the synergy between gluten and glyphosate. We took this down to 2 parts per million of glyphosate and the amount of gliadin you'd see in one slice of pizza. So if you put a tiny bit of glyphosate in with a tiny bit of gluten, you end up with some 80% drop. So there's a synergistic or additive effect of those 2 compounds. We've now shown why Perlmutter's graph looked like this. This is from Perlmutter's book, but he pulled this from the CDC. So this is showing the number of acres sprayed with of wheat sprayed with glyphosate. So this was in 1992 when we, for the first time, put in the same bite of food glyphosate and gluten, both tight junction toxins. Same year, and every time we go up on numbers of acres of spray, we increase the incidence of celiac disease. All right, so we put gluten and glyphosate in the same bite, we develop a problem. This is the paper that's coming out in a couple months now. We've shown a mechanism by which this happens. Turns out that when glyphosate hits the membrane, you get an upregulation of CXCR3, which is the receptor that gliadin binds to break the tight junction. If you never saw glyphosate, you would have almost no CXCR3 and you would never break a tight junction. As soon as glyphosate hits, CXCR3 pops up on the surface of the cell, and the next bite of gluten causes gluten sensitivity and that breakdown, and you get everything from the brain fog to the gut discomfort and everything else. And so we're really excited for this paper to come out because it was finally kind of closing the loop of what was a theoretical problem to really nailing it, that this is the bullet that caused this incredible condition. It does seem to act through the zonulin pathway, but we're going to be doing some more work to tease that out further. So as a summary slide, gluten, glyphosate, and a lot of bacterial and yeast overgrowth patterns will cause toxic peptide to induce zonulin. Zonulin is made by the intestinal membrane. It goes systemic, hits tight junctions all over, blood-brain barrier, kidney tubules, all of that, and you get tight junction breakdown in the leaky gut. If you put the terahydrite into play, you get an upregulation of DPP-4 enzymes. These are really critical protective mechanisms that break down the toxic peptides and break down zonulin before they ever cause the leaky gut. And so that's why the terahydrite seems to be working, is it's upregulating a ton of enzymes that are detoxing and protecting the gut membrane before the toxin ever hits it. I'm going to skip this stuff, although you just say, wow, ooh, pretty. It sounds like Velcro, okay? Velcro holds all those cells together, but it's much cooler than Velcro. It's actually more like fiber optic cable that has channels for communication between the cells, and that's what's breaking. We are literally breaking the fiber optic communication cables between the cells, and a single cell that's lonely enough, loses all of it, becomes a cancer cell. Much cooler stuff here. Again, if you touch that small bowel with the terahydrite, you get a 1,200-fold increase in the glutathione production in just hours. So 4 hours later, 1,200% increase in glutathione, which is your main antioxidant. And so your bacteria are programming your body to respond to injury. Same thing, very super cool here is in regard to repair. We're doing urine CD133 markers here. This is a baseline in an individual who's never seen the compound. Takes 1 tablespoon, 15 milliliters of terahydrite. 2 hours later, there's a 30% increase in stem cell activity in the body. 1 tablespoon of bacterial communication, and you get that kind of jump in a human being. So I'm going to stop there because I really want Stephanie to jump in here and go, and you guys need a quick bathroom break before she goes. So I will take questions out back, but please stay in here for Stephanie's, and I will be here for Stephanie's lecture. And so I can take questions after Stephanie's as well. So stay here for Stephanie.